It's the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey, back live. In 2024, Governor J.B. Pritzker called for getting rid of Illinois' 1% statewide tax on groceries.
It's one more regressive tax that we just don't need. If it reduces inflation for families from 4 to 3%, even if it only puts a few $100 back in families' pockets, it's the right thing to do.
The General Assembly took the governor up on that, and he signed a law to get rid of the tax later that year. It officially expired at the start of this year. But here's the thing. Many of us are still paying that tax. The money from the grocery tax went to local governments, cities and counties, and many of them have responded by reimposing the tax through their village boards or city councils. We're going to talk now about what effects this change is having and what governments across the 21st state are doing about it. Later, we'll talk with a pair of local government leaders, but we start with some background. And with us for that is Maurice Scholten. He's president of the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois, a nonpartisan organization focused on state and local taxes across the state. Maurice, welcome to the 21st show.
Thank you for having me.
Also with us, Elizabeth Powers, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, also a partnering scholar at the Institute of Government and Public Affairs at the U of I. Elizabeth, welcome to the 21st show to you as well.
Thank you. Good morning.
And listeners, you can join us today at 800-222-9455. We want to know how your grocery bill has looked lately. What do you think about getting rid of this tax? And what other changes do you think Illinois or its cities should think about when it comes to taxation? Again, 800-222-9455 is the number. 800-222-9455. All right, Maurice Scholten, we'll hear specifics from some of the mayors we're going to talk to later, but broadly, how did the money from the statewide grocery tax get used by cities?
It kind of got used at their discretion. It was distributed based on where those grocery sales occurred. So municipalities with more grocery stores, more higher sales, got more of that revenue, and it just kind of essentially went into their general fund, and then they were able to use it to pay employees, pay for projects, pay off debt, pay for pensions, things like that. It just went to the general pot with all the other tax money.
How do you rate this as like a share? How significant was this revenue for local government?
Again, it depends on the municipality. For some municipalities, they may not have much retail presence or a large grocery store within their borders, so it didn't have much of an effect on them. You can have other municipalities that are larger, that are maybe more of a destination, that where they attract residents from other surrounding municipalities to kind of shop within their borders. And then for them, it is a much bigger piece of that pie. But again, it wasn't the hard thing with this. The Department of Revenue didn't have exact estimates because the grocery tax for sales tax was not broken out previously. So it's hard to say with exact certainty, how much it affected any community in Illinois.
And then what about the background? Why did Illinois have a grocery tax in the first place?
So when Illinois first enacted a sales tax back in 1933, the rate was only 2%, and it applied to all goods that were sold, whether it be a chair or groceries. And that was kept that way for decades. And then Jim Thompson, when he first ran for governor, he campaigned on eliminating the grocery tax, eliminated from the state sales tax in the early 80s, and that's what they did. The state rate was actually increased from 4% to 5%, but then the state exempted groceries from the state tax. However, local municipalities could were continuing to tax groceries. And that kind of was what happened, or was the lay of the land up until a little bit after COVID, when the Governor Pritzker and the General Assembly, they did a 1-year grocery tax suspension from July 1st, 2022 to 2023, to June 30th, 2023. That proved popular, and that was I think that was kind of the genesis for this permanent elimination, partial elimination, as you kind of alluded to. Again, but one difference with that previous suspension back in 2022, the state agreed to make up for the losses by local governments. So that one, the state replaced that lost tax revenue, whereas now the state is not going to do that going forward.
Elizabeth Powers, I want to bring you into the conversation now. So, how typical or atypical is it for Illinois to have this statewide tax on groceries?
It's pretty unusual at this point. There are 9 states that currently have a grocery tax or just apply the general sales tax rate to groceries. And two states, Kansas and Oklahoma, very recently dropped their grocery taxes.
What is the argument there? Is sort of a economic justice thing or low, conservative low tax argument? What do you hear from other states?
Not sure about each of the other states. They're really a diverse set of states. They range from Mississippi to Hawaii. I mean, there's not a lot of rhyme or reason to which states have a grocery tax that face on the surface. In Illinois, I think it was part of a move to make food more accessible and affordable, especially for low-income households. It was part of a larger initiative by the governor.
Yeah, well,
That's my perception.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. And Maurice, let me ask you about that because, right, the statewide grocery tax, it was a sort of a flat tax, but obviously some people are more affected by that than others in terms of their spending. So can you pull on that thread a little bit?
Yeah, and it depends on the person you're looking at. On the lower income side of things, if you use SNAP to buy groceries, you're not paying sales tax on that anyways. You're under old law, so they're not affected. Middle income, you're buying groceries, you are now getting the sales tax break if your municipality hasn't imposed the grocery tax. The same thing on the higher income side. However, I think generally as you go up the income scale, you're more likely to eat out of restaurants, so you're probably buying less groceries. And when you do eat out of the restaurant, not only does it cost more, but when you go to the restaurant, that purchase, the general merchandise sales tax rate, the full rate, closer to 9%, 10% applies to that purchase. So they're paying more taxes on that. So again, depending on whether you really want to look at groceries or you want to look at food and kind of what style you want to split those categories up into.
All right. So, Elizabeth, let me ask you about the way in which Illinois has gotten rid of the grocery tax this time. Maurice mentioned that we've done this before back in 2022, but the state sort of held municipalities harmless, if you will, by replacing the money from the grocery tax that was funneled toward them. What is different about the structure of how Illinois eliminated it this time around?
Well, this time around, they basically replayed the 2023 structure of just removing the grocery tax. And it should be. I'd like to explain as background that the state collected a 1% grocery tax, but then passed it all through immediately to municipalities, and so they eliminated that in 2023. They paid the states back $360 million in lost revenue at that time. Now this time they've simply eliminated it, but they had a couple of stipulations that you could think of as kind of like remediation for the lost revenues. So one is, as we're talking about, that they granted the municipalities authority to impose a 1% grocery tax of their own without having a public referendum, which formerly they would have had to have had. And then the other thing that I think is much less well known is that municipalities were also granted the authority to impose a sales tax, a general sales tax of their own, of up to 1%. Without having voter approval, which might normally be an obstacle to raising taxes to make up for the loss of the grocery tax.
Maurice, you're with the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois, which looks at all kinds of angles of policy of taxation. How does it change that conversation to have this argument about this tax or sales tax more broadly shifted from state government to every one of the hundreds of village boards and county boards and city councils across Illinois?
Well, I think one thing that's a positive is it aligns the government that imposes the tax with the government that receives and benefits from the tax. So in the voters, if you don't like the tax before, the municipality would receive the tax, but they would have to complain to the state if they didn't want to get rid of it. Generally, you want that alignment generally. It's not always the case. With income taxes, we don't have that. But again, that's I think it was a positive. One positive way you can look at this. It kind of brings local control back to those local municipalities.
Small d democratic, I guess, right? It's probably a little easier for people to advocate to their city council member, outside of Chicago or something, but in a smaller town than it would be to their state senator or something. All right, let me take a moment to remind people this is the 21st show. We're talking about what's happening in cities and counties across Illinois now that the state has gotten rid of its statewide grocery tax. We heard from some of you in our texting group about this, which you can join by sending the word TALK to 217-803-0730. Amy in Wakanda said, since 1% on even my largest grocery bill is $3, I don't begrudge towns their nickels and dimes. My grocery bills overall have been going up, but I'm informed enough to know that's corporate inflation, she says, not food tax burden crushing me slowly. Sure wish my national government would do something about that. I'll just keep voting and calling and waiting. We also heard from David in Mount Morris, who said at this point, removing the grocery tax is the equivalent of removing a drop of water from a boat being flooded. We've been talking about all this and some of the broader background here with Maurice Schulten, president of the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois, Elizabeth Powers, professor of economics at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and we also wanted to hear from people in city government who are having to make decisions about what this change is doing to their communities and what their local responses have been. In Peoria Heights, for example, the grocery tax is gone, but turns out that may only be temporary. Here to talk about why is the mayor of that village, Matthew Wigginton. Mayor Wigginton, welcome to the 21st show.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So what happened to make this change temporary?
As Mr. Schulten and Professor Powers were mentioning, we did have the option to move forward with a municipal grocery tax, and my local municipality, my board, determined to do exactly that. So they did pass a grocery tax locally. And while I had run against the institution of a grocery tax in my community, I decided to use our first mayoral veto in history to veto that grocery tax. Now, ultimately, my board overturned the veto, but effectively what my veto did was delay the institution of that tax for 6 months. We missed the deadline for the Department of Revenue to get our tax at the start of the January 1st deadline. So our local tax will go into effect in July of this year. So for 6 months, we're tax-free as far as our groceries are concerned.
Yeah, the state basically, the law says you have to meet a deadline of either October or April, I think, in order to have the tax collected. Because again, the state collects this and remits the money back to the local governments. So why do you said you campaigned on this? Why do you support getting rid of the grocery tax?
Well, Brian, you had a clip from Governor Pritzker earlier calling this a regressive tax, and I tend to agree with the governor on that. In our community, we have 100% of the school children, the public school children, receive free breakfast and free lunch. So we're already federally recognized as having a great potential for food insecurity. And so sitting there and having the option to tax people's dinner tables on top of what they were already facing from inflation, it just didn't make sense for our community. And so that was the real motivation behind me using our first ever veto to try to make just food more affordable for our community.
What does this change, temporary as it is, to not have the grocery tax there? What does it mean for the village finances?
Well, that's the beauty from our community, Brian, is that we are having almost a decade worth of maintaining budget surpluses. So we are running a clean, effective, efficient government in Peoria Heights. And so the minimal impact that this grocery tax would have provided, or the loss thereof, it would still enable me to continue to have surpluses in year over year. And so much so that I lowered our personal property tax levy just earlier last month. And so I think we were well positioned to handle what the lack of grocery tax revenue would have offered.
So no, I mean, you're saying indefinitely. You don't think that this would have ever caused a crunch in the future necessarily.
No, we, like many smaller communities, we were faced, and this is impending, that we're losing our primary grocery store in Peoria Heights. So they're moving out of our community. So I was also faced with the reality of, how do I entice a grocer to our community as well? And making it 1% more, effective, making our groceries 1% cheaper than our surrounding communities just gives us a competitive advantage. So I had no doubt in my mind that we could have afforded the crunch that eliminating this grocery tax would have presented.
All right, we are going to take another break on the program. When we come back, we'll hear from another mayor, the mayor of Quincy, Illinois, on why she ultimately supported keeping the grocery tax there. We'll hear more from Mayor Matthew Wigginton of Peoria Heights, Maurice Schulten with the Taxpayers Federation, and Elizabeth Powers of the University of Illinois. This is the 21st Show. Stay with us. It's the 21st Show. I'm Brian Mackey, and we are talking today about the end of the statewide grocery tax in Illinois, from what it means for consumers and towns to what some places in Illinois are doing to keep their budgets in line. We'll come back to our live panel in a few minutes, but first we're going to bring in one more voice, Linda Moore, the mayor of Quincy, where the city council voted in favor of a local grocery tax, and Moore had been against that. She campaigned on that. She couldn't join us live today, but I did speak with her earlier this week about why she ended up supporting the grocery tax for now. Mayor Linda Moore of Quincy, Illinois, welcome to the 21st Show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
What is your sense, roughly, of how much money the grocery tax means for Quincy?
Well, roughly, our estimate is that it's about $1 million a year. And for us, we would have loved to have followed the state's plan and eliminated the grocery tax. Food is so essential to everybody, and we really wanted to eliminate the tax completely. But given that we have lost $34 million in revenues from the states due to them cutting other things, not to mention all of the unfunded mandates that came on top of that, we just didn't feel we were in a position to let it go this year as we evaluated. What we have promised to do, though, is that on an annual basis, we will come back to reevaluate. And if we can make up that revenue through other resources, then we would vote at that time to eliminate the grocery tax.
What does that money do for Quincy? What does $1 or $1.2 million buy the people of Quincy?
Well, for us, it's part of the sales tax, and sales tax is our biggest source of revenue. It's bigger than even property tax revenue. So for us, that sales tax pays for our general operations. $1 million would help us resurface about 30 blocks of street. It would help us completely rebuild 2 to 4 blocks of street. It would help us to replace lead service lines for an entire neighborhood. So there are a number of things that we could do with $1 million.
Yeah, I was trying to think like how many police officers does that pay for a year, right? Salaries.
Well, for police officers, that would pay for, that's about 10% of our police department budget.
Wow. Okay.
It's about 12% of our fire department budget every year. So, it's a pretty big chunk.
So you mentioned that you originally, like this idea of wanting to, get rid of the grocery tax. Talk about, how your mind was changed on that.
Sure. Well, and in fact, I campaigned on this and really wanted to eliminate the tax completely. My feeling was there are a lot of things in life that are luxuries. Putting food on your table isn't one of them. So eliminating the grocery tax would help everybody. However, then once I was elected, our financial people and our comptroller in particular convinced me that given the uncertainties of budgeting from the state, this year and next year, this was probably money that we needed to hold on to as long as we could, or until we found a replacement for it. And I didn't have time to find a replacement in just, a couple of months. So we are looking for a replacement source. And if we find it, then we would eliminate the grocery tax at some point down the line.
How do you feel about the way the statewide tax was eliminated, where, the people in power in the state can say, look, we cut the grocery tax, and it's up to municipalities to make this decision on to whether they want to be literally holding the bag here?
Well, it's kind of like mom making the decision that dad doesn't need the money, or dad making the decision that mom doesn't need the money. The grocery tax flowed to the municipalities, and I would have liked to have had the opportunity for input from local governments before the state decision was made. That's the way it should be. Get input from those most impacted by the decision first.
What conversations have you had? What are your other options, right? Other levers you can try and tweak. You mentioned other revenue sources. What options do you have? What are you considering?
Well, there could be other revenue sources such as an electricity tax, or we already have a food and beverage tax. Could we increase food and beverage tax? Could we increase hotel motel tax? Could we increase the local purchase tax? There's other things we could do, but for me, if you're swapping one tax for another tax, it really doesn't help. It's just a swap at this point.
Yeah. Well, talk then about how you would decide. I mean, you're holding out the possibility that, maybe this could be reversed at some point down the line and the grocery tax could go away. You said you campaigned on this, but go ahead. How realistic is that? Go ahead.
Well, our hope is that we will see incremental revenue by growing our economy. Whether that's bringing new businesses to the community or opening up new markets of tourists coming to the city and spending money here. If we can find a new revenue source that doesn't fall on the backs of our current residents, that would be the ideal situation. For example, we are considering how we might be able to build a sports complex that would bring in youth tournaments every weekend. And could a facility pay for itself and generate incremental sales tax and incremental food and beverage tax and incremental hotel motel tax? That those sources of additional revenues would then offset the elimination of the grocery tax. That could be a very possible scenario.
Last question, I think, probably on this. How do you feel about the politics of this? I mean, was this a difficult decision for you? Is it something you feel like you're having to swallow something you didn't want to?
Well, absolutely. And I don't like it. And I don't like that local governments have been put in this situation, but it's part of, governing. The organizations at the top make decisions and everything rolls downhill, as we know. So it's the local governments that often have to pick up the slack when federal or state governments cut expenses or issue unfunded mandates. So it's just part of what we deal with. It's part of the job.
Linda Moore is the mayor of Quincy, Illinois. Mayor Moore, thanks for sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you, Brian. I enjoyed being with you.
Once again, in order to make our schedules meet, we spoke with Mayor Moore earlier this week. We're back live now, 800-222-9455. If you have a comment on this in the last few minutes of the show today, 800-222-9455. We are talking about the grocery tax in Illinois, which officially went away at the start of the year statewide, but many cities and counties have opted to keep some local version of the tax in place. We'll come back to our panel for the last few minutes of the program. Elizabeth Powers, professor of economics at the U of I Urbana-Champaign. Matthew Wigginton is the mayor of Peoria Heights, where the local tax is set to go into effect in July. And Maurice Scholten, president of the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois. Maurice, how does some of what we just heard from Mayor Moore of Quincy line up with what you've heard from leaders in other parts of the state?
Yeah, I mean, first off, every municipality is different. The businesses, the residents, their existing tax makeup is different. The liabilities, the things they have to spend the money on is different. They have different options. So, there's not one one template that everybody can follow. I think every municipality that has grocery stores that we can generate a fair amount of money we're facing a difficult choice. And there's different ways to respond. Again, she mentioned other taxes, and as Professor Powers mentioned earlier, part of the same bill that gave some municipalities the ability to impose a general sales tax up to 1% without referendum. Some municipalities had already imposed that, some hadn't. Some we were able to do that, lay on that tax, that type of sales tax, more than the grocery tax, and it was a decision. It was a weighing of different options, and there was no great options, I would say.
Mayor Wigginton, we talked with Mayor Moore about the possibility of getting rid of the grocery tax there altogether. What would it take, do you think, to make that the reality where you are?
Well, Brian, what I have done, and both Professor Powers and Mr. Scholten had mentioned, this bill from Springfield had allowed municipalities to pass this tax without going to the voters. Well, I have been able to secure a referendum on our primary ballot coming in March, a referendum just asking the question whether my citizens want to have a tax on their eggs, milk, baby formula, and other groceries. And so hopefully my board will take the feedback from that referendum and be able to decide whether the grocery tax is in fact right for our community. So that is my hope, that the direct feedback from the voters will assist them.
What do you think of municipalities that say, you know what, it's not such a big change. Maybe it hurts more than it, hurts city budgets more than it helps shoppers?
Well, I think that it depends on the shopper. Again, in my community, as Mr. Scholten said, every community is a little bit different. In my community, we have a very vibrant dining and entertainment district that attracts a lot of folks to come to our community from outside. And that does pay for a lot of our curbs and gutters. But in the meantime, we also have a lot of residents that face economic insecurity. And so I think that it really depends on the person. And for some people, that 1% on their groceries, I think one of your callers had said it was, a drop of water in a sinking ship. But for some, that could be potentially drowning in what they're living with. So I want to make sure that those people can have a little bit more affordability in their day-to-day life.
Appreciate the thematic metaphor there. Elizabeth Powers, professor at the U of I. Let me come back to you, and we just have a few minutes left. But do you expect that getting rid of this tax, would change people's grocery shopping habits?
Yeah, it's interesting. Just to speak to what Mayor Moore pointed out, which I think is really key. for municipalities that want to make up the funds. What is the alternative to the grocery tax? And as Maurice pointed out, there's a group that's exempt from the grocery tax, and that's the very lowest income households who are on SNAP. If municipalities go to the general merchandise tax instead, the problem with that is there's no group that's exempt from that. So, the sheltering of the people, households at the very bottom of the income distribution from the grocery tax is already occurs. The other thing, in terms of affordability, 1% is a very small percentage, and so it works out to about $1 a week or less for the lowest income households. And then, of course, many are exempt from that completely. There's some studies about health benefits or nutrition benefits of of dropping grocery taxes, and there's very little shift to healthier foods as a result.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
I hate to throw cold water, but I think that the impact of the grocery tax on households is actually, there's not a lot of strong evidence that there's a major impact.
Yeah. Well, and we've seen so much inflation, speaking of affordability, that it seems like any benefit from this would probably have been made up with the cost of bacon and other packaged foods and things like, many things that have gone up in price. All right. We're going to have to leave it there. Elizabeth Powers is a professor of economics at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Maurice Scholten is the president of the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois. Matthew Wigginton is the mayor of Peoria Heights. And thanks also to Linda Moore, the mayor of Quincy, with whom I spoke earlier this week. Thanks also to everyone who sent us text messages about this. If you want to join our texting group, you can do that by sending the word TALK to 217-803-0730. Once again, TALK, T-A-L-K, text that to 217-803-0730. Coming up tomorrow, a new report from the State Department of Public Health investigates Illinoisans' relationship with alcohol. We'll talk about the findings and what they mean for our health. Plus, Illinois-based researchers say there's a variation of the tall grass known as miscanthus that could be a financial game changer for farmers. Its potential uses include livestock bedding, compostable packaging, fuel for heating and electricity, even as an absorbent for diapers. We'll talk about the plant and what the future might hold. The 21st Show is a production of Illinois Public Media. I'm Brian Mackey. Thanks for listening. We will talk with you again tomorrow.